I still remember the sound of that phrase, echoing off the hangar walls. Real pilots only. It was said with a laugh, a smirk, a casual shove of the shoulder, that always managed to leave me standing just outside the circle. My name is Elena Vance, and for years those 3 words followed me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. I grew up with the sky in my blood. My father flew cargo runs across the Midwest. He'd take me up in the old Cessna when I was barely tall enough to see over the yoke. The first time the wheels left the ground, something inside me locked into place. That was home. Not the house, not the ground, the air. By 28, I had every rating they said. A woman like me didn't need. Multi-engine, instrument, turbine, night. I flew medevac. I flew corporate. I flew into storms that made grown men cancel flights. And still, every time I walked into a new hangar or a pilot lounge, someone would glance at my braid or the curve of my flight suit and say it. Real pilots only. As if the sky cared what I looked like. Then I met Jake. He was the kind of pilot the others listened to without question. Tall, easy smile, voice that filled a room. He flew for a private air charter company that specialized in high-stakes clients. Politicians, executives, the ones who paid for silence and skill. The day I walked into their hangar looking for a contract seat, the phrase was already in the air. One of the senior guys muttered it loud enough for me to hear. Jake turned, looked me over and said, "Ignore them. If you can fly, you fly." He gave me a chance. More than that, he made me feel like I belonged. We flew together. We talked until the stars faded. He told me about the missions that never made the news, the ones that required a certain kind of pilot. I told him about the nights I still dreamed of the cockpit, the way the world disappeared when the altimeter started climbing. For the first time in a long time, the phrase, "real pilots only," started to lose its power. I should have known better. Because what I didn't know that day, what none of them knew, was that I already had a name the sky respected, a name that had never been spoken in that hangar, a name that belonged to the dark and midday. It started small, a cancelled flight that somehow always landed on my schedule, a client who preferred a male pilot. After Jake had a quiet conversation, then the big contract came through, an overnight run into weather that most crews wouldn't touch. I had the hours. I had the ratings. I had already plotted the route 3 different ways. Jake took it. He told me it was company politics. He told me it was temporary. He kissed my forehead and said we'd celebrate when he got back. I waited on the tarmac like a fool, watching his plane disappear into the grey. When he returned, the story had already changed. The near miss with the storm cell, the emergency diversion, the way he saved the client's life. The hangar celebrated him. Glasses were raised. Someone clapped him on the back and said, "That's why we keep the real pilots around." I smiled. I congratulated him. And that night, while he slept, I opened the flight logs he had left on the kitchen table. The route was mine. The weather call was mine. The alternate airports, the fuel calculations, the exact timing, all of it lifted from the notes I had written in my own hand. He hadn't saved anyone. He had flown the plan I built and taken the credit like it was his birthright. The betrayal didn't hit like a storm. It settled like fog, slow, cold, impossible to see through. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt something inside me crack, then harden. Every real pilot's only I had swallowed for years rose up at once. Every time I had made myself smaller so the room would stay comfortable. Every time I had let a man explain the sky to me as if I hadn't already lived in it, I didn't scream. I didn't confront him that night. I simply stood up, packed my bag, and left the key on the counter. By morning I was gone. No note, no explanation, just absence. The weeks that followed were the hardest. I flew charter work under a different company name. I took the night shifts no one wanted. I trained harder than I ever had, not to prove anything to them, but to remember who I was before I let someone else's voice live in my head. The anger didn't leave. It just changed shape. It became fuel. I started hearing whispers again. Not about Jake. About a pilot who had once flown under a different call sign. Someone who had pulled a damaged aircraft out of a no-fly zone years earlier. Someone whose name still made certain people in high places go quiet. They thought that pilot was a man. They always did. They never imagined it was the woman they kept pushing outside the circle. The invitation came 6 months later. A closed-door industry summit. Top charter operators. Insurance underwriters. A few government liaisons who didn't advertise their presence. Jake was speaking. Of course he was. He had built his reputation on the story of that stormy night, the night that still belonged to me. I walked into the room late. No announcement, just the soft click of the door and the gradual silence that followed when people realized someone new had entered. Jake was mid-sentence, talking about real skill under pressure when his eyes found mine. The color left his face for half a second. Then the smile returned. Too bright, too practiced. Someone near the front muttered it, almost out of habit. Real pilots only. A few people chuckled. The phrase rolled across the room like it always had. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stepped forward until I stood in the open space between the tables and the podium. And I said the name they had never connected to. Me, Spectre. The room stopped breathing. One of the older men near the back. Someone with a clearance, level most of these people would never touch, slowly stood up. His eyes locked on mine. Recognition, respect, a little fear. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence did the work for both of us. Jake tried to recover. He started talking about coincidence, about shared call signs, about how common names were in the community. No one was listening. The underwriters were already leaning toward each other. The government liaison had his phone out. The story Jake had built his career on was unraveling in real time, because the woman who actually flew that route was standing in front of them, and the name she carried still carried weight. They didn't throw him out that day. They didn't need to. Contracts dried up. Clients asked questions. The same men who once echoed, "Real pilots only," suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere when he entered a room. Reputation, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild when the people who matter start remembering the truth. I didn't stay to watch him fall. I left the same way I arrived, quietly. Outside, the sky was clear. I climbed into the aircraft waiting for me, taxied out, and lifted off into air that felt cleaner than it had in years. Some people will always try to decide who belongs in the sky. They will draw circles and invent phrases and tell themselves the story that makes them feel safe. But the sky doesn't care about their words. It only cares whether you can fly. And when the room finally goes quiet, it isn't because someone louder spoke. It's because the truth finally walked in, wearing its real name. I still fly. I still hear the old phrase sometimes, usually from people who have never left the ground in a storm. I don't answer it anymore. I just keep climbing, because the only voice that ever mattered was the one that already knew who I was.